my name's Lauren Carter. I'm 41 years old, and the last time my family laid eyes on me, they thought I was nothing more than a washed-up failure, scraping by as a dishwasher at some truck stop diner out in Nebraska. That was 3 years back, standing in the same kitchen we grew up in, when my older sister Emma jabbed her manicured finger at my beat-up jeans and grease-stained work shirt like I was some kind of disgrace. "Take a look at yourself, Ren," she sneered, her voice dripping with that old mix of pity and contempt. "If Mom and Dad could see what you've turned into, they'd be rolling in their graves." My brother Jake just nodded along, arms folded across his chest, dressed in one of those flashy suits he wore whenever he wanted everyone to know how well he was doing. "We tried helping you after the whole military thing didn't pan out," he said flatly. "But you can't help somebody who doesn't want to be helped." The military thing. That's how they summed up my 8 years as a military police officer, my 2 overseas tours, and the Bronze Star I earned. To them, it was just some failed attempt at a career. To me, it was my life's blood. I stood there quietly, letting them take their shots. Emma was all smiles about her engagement to a hedge fund guy named Matthew, and Jake couldn't stop bragging about his new promotion at the law firm. They'd invited me over for Sunday dinner just to drop the news that I wasn't welcome at the wedding. "It's nothing personal," Emma lied, not daring to meet my eyes. "It's just Matthew's family is very traditional, very successful. I can't have them thinking we come from this kind of background. A sister who washed dishes, that's how she wanted to frame me." Jake, trying to play the hero, pulled out his checkbook like he was throwing scraps to a beggar. "Here's $5,000. Clean yourself up. Take some classes. But don't come around again until you've got your life together." I stared at that check for a long second. $5,000. To them, it was pocket change. To me, it was the price tag they'd slapped on my entire worth. I left it sitting on the counter and walked out. What they had no clue about, what they couldn't possibly have imagined, was that I wasn't some down-on-her-luck dishwasher. I was undercover with the U.S. Marshal Service, working a deep operation aimed at tearing down a trafficking ring that ran from Midwestern truck stops all the way to the Mexican border. That diner job? The tattered clothes, the staged broke lifestyle, even the rundown apartment I let them see pictures of, it was all part of the cover. 3 straight years of 18-hour days. 3 years earning trust from some of the most dangerous people in the country. 3 years living on the edge, putting myself at risk to protect lives they'd never known needed saving. But to Emma and Jake, I was nothing more than the embarrassing little sister who couldn't get her act together. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they were busy climbing the social and career ladders, I was serving as a deputy U.S. Marshal in the Special Operations Group, one of only 47 women in the most elite fugitive hunting unit in federal law enforcement. My paycheck was more than double what Jake pulled in as a junior partner, and my security clearance ranked higher than anything my family could even imagine. But I couldn't breathe a word of it. Not then. Not until the mission wrapped up and the arrests were locked down. The takedown came on a Tuesday in March. 17 arrests in 4 different states. 3 of those were high-value targets who'd been on the most wanted list for more than 2 years. The case I'd lived and bled for dismantled one of the largest trafficking networks in America. That Friday, the call finally came. Marshal Hayes, my supervisor said, voice warm with satisfaction. "Pack your real clothes. You're going home." Home. I hadn't been there, really been there, in 3 years. And wouldn't you know it, the wedding was set for Saturday. Emma's picture-perfect spring wedding at the Riverside Country Club, the same place where Mom and Dad had celebrated their 25th anniversary before the accident. Jake had texted me the details months earlier, probably forgetting, or maybe not caring, that they'd officially cut me from the guest list. Part of me wanted to skip the whole thing. I could have just filed my final report, taken some much-needed leave, and vanished to a beach somewhere to breathe again after 3 years of living under a mask. But another part of me, the part that remembered being 12 years old, standing in the shadow of Emma's trophies and Jake's medals, always just the other Hayes kid, that part wanted to see their faces when the truth finally hit them. So I showed up at the country club right as the ceremony kicked off. I'd driven straight from headquarters in my own vehicle, a black Ford Explorer with government plates most folks wouldn't even notice. For the first time in months, I was in my full dress uniform, navy blue, sharp lines, and the shining 5-point star badge of the U.S. Marshal Service on display. The rank on my shoulders and the ribbons across my chest told a story my family had no clue about. The Bronze Star at the top, then 2 Meritorious Service Medals, a Joint Service Commendation Medal, and the Combat Action Badge from my Army days. Below that, my Marshal Service Honors, the Medal of Valor, the Exceptional Service Award, and 3 commendation letters straight from the director's desk. I could have slipped in wearing civvies, sat quietly in the back, and kept my presence low-key. But I didn't want that. I wanted them to finally see me, really see me, for who I was. The country club security was exactly what I expected, one half-bored guy in an ill-fitting suit checking invites at the front door. When I walked up, his eyes flicked over my uniform, the badge, the way I carried myself. "Good afternoon, Marshal," he said respectfully, stepping aside without even asking for an invitation. The ceremony was already in motion by the time I slipped inside. Emma stood at the altar in her flawless white gown, glowing like she always did, next to a tall man in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Jake was right there too, playing best man, looking sharp in his tailor-made suit, every bit the picture of a successful attorney. I slid into the last row, tucking myself behind a cluster of Matthew's family. They whispered back and forth about stocks, vacation homes in the Hamptons, and things I'd never cared to pretend I belonged to. A few curious eyes drifted toward me. It's hard not to notice a federal officer sitting in full dress uniform, but most folks kept their focus on the bride and groom. And there it was, the irony hitting me again. My sister was marrying her way into prestige and money, while 30 feet away sat the sibling she once called an embarrassment. The same sister who swore I was a stain on the family name was now saying her vows in front of a deputy U.S. Marshal who had just spent 3 years taking down some of the worst human traffickers in the country. The ceremony ended without a hiccup. Emma and Matthew kissed, the guests clapped, and the whole crowd shuffled toward the reception hall. I stayed seated for a while, watching the family dynamic I knew too well play out like a rerun. Emma floated gracefully through Matthew's family, smiling, hugging, collecting compliments as if she'd been born for this stage. Jake, meanwhile, worked the room like he was on the campaign trail, shaking hands, dropping names, making sure everyone knew who he was. Neither one noticed me sitting in plain sight. It wasn't until the reception was buzzing that my moment finally came. I was parked near the bar, sipping a club soda, content to watch the show from the edges, when I caught a voice that made me pause. Matthew's mother stood nearby, surrounded by relatives. "Emma's family is lovely," she said sweetly. "Though I hear she has a sister who's been struggling. Something about waitressing or dishwashing? Very sad, really." "That's too bad," answered an older man I recognized as Matthew's uncle, some big-name banker. "It happens a lot with veterans. The military teaches discipline, sure, but they don't always adapt well after service. It's a real problem these days." "Oh, she wasn't truly military," Matthew's mother corrected, her tone a little too light. "It was some security position that didn't pan out." Emma was discreet, of course, but you could tell she was embarrassed. "Apparently the girl works at a diner, barely scraping by." That familiar fire flared in my chest, the same burning anger I'd felt 3 years ago in our kitchen. Only this time I wasn't undercover. This time I didn't have to swallow it down. "Excuse me," I said, stepping into their little circle. "I couldn't help overhearing you talking about Emma's sister." Matthew's mother spun toward me, her polite smile faltering as her eyes ran over my uniform. "Oh, I'm sorry, officer. Are you here on official business?" "Not exactly," I said evenly, keeping my voice steady. "I'm Emma's sister." The air went still, like someone had cut the music. Matthew's mother blinked at me, this time really noticing the uniform, the 5-point badge, the insignia, the ribbons. Her face froze as she tried to process what she was seeing. "I think there's been some confusion about who I am," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Lauren Carter, Special Operations Group. For the past 3 years, I've been working undercover to break apart a human trafficking network. Last Tuesday, we locked up 17 suspects and freed 43 victims, 12 of them kids." The banker uncle's complexion drained to chalk. You're a federal marshal?" "That's right. And before that, I spent 8 years as an Army MP. 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan. I earned a Bronze Star under fire." Matthew's mother looked like she might faint. "But Emma told us." Emma told you what she believed, I cut in. My work requires secrecy, even from my own family. That's when Emma herself appeared, drawn by the growing crowd. She froze when her eyes landed on me in uniform. Ren, she breathed, staring like she didn't recognize her own sister. What are you doing here? And why are you dressed like that? I turned to face her head-on. For the first time in years, she actually looked at me, my face, my badge, the insignia on my shoulders, the story written across the ribbons on my chest. Hello, Emma, I said. Congratulations on your wedding. I don't understand, she stammered. You work at a diner. You've been washing dishes for years. No, I said simply. I've been undercover with the U.S. Marshal service for the past 3 years. The diner was part of my cover. Her face twisted through a storm of emotions, confusion, disbelief, then something like horror. You're lying. Without a word, I reached inside my jacket, pulled out my credentials, and handed them over. The leather case flipped open, revealing my badge and ID. Emma's hands trembled as she read my name, my rank, my photo in uniform. Matthew leaned over her shoulder, his voice catching. Oh my God, he whispered. You're actually a federal marshal. Special Operations Group, I confirmed. We handle the toughest fugitive hunts and deep undercover assignments. Right then, Jake barged through the crowd, his voice loud and annoyed. What's going on here? He stopped dead when his eyes hit me. Ren? What the hell are you wearing? This, I said, standing tall, is my dress uniform. Jake, allow me to reintroduce myself. Deputy U.S. Marshal Lauren Carter. You might remember me as your dishwasher sister. Jake's jaw opened and closed like a fish gasping on dry land. His eyes ran over every inch of my uniform, the crisp pressed fabric, the polished badge, the rows of ribbons that carried more weight, sacrifice, and courage than he'd ever know sitting behind a mahogany desk. Impossible, he finally muttered. You washed out of the military. You've been bouncing between minimum wage jobs for years. I didn't wash out of anything, I said, steady and calm. I finished my service honorably, and the marshals recruited me straight out of the army. My starting pay as a deputy was more than what you earned in your first 3 years at the law firm. By then, the crowd had swelled. Matthew's family, Emma's friends, even some of the waitstaff stood nearby, riveted by this little drama unfolding in the middle of a wedding reception. But the money, Jake stammered, almost pleading. You were broke. You couldn't even make rent. My rent was government issued, I said evenly. The apartment, the bills, it was all part of my cover. On top of that, I drew my full salary, federal benefits, and hazard pay for the risks involved. I wasn't broke, Jake. I was undercover. Emma was crying now. I couldn't tell if it was humiliation, relief, or some ugly mixture of the two. Matthew hovered beside her, one arm draped protectively around her shoulders, his face a storm of confusion as he tried to process it all. Why didn't you tell us? Emma finally asked through her tears. Because I couldn't, I answered. The cover had to be airtight, even with family. And because, I let my words hang for a moment, making sure they both heard me. Because you made it clear you were ashamed of me. Emma, you uninvited me from your wedding. Jake, you tossed me a check like I was a charity case. Both of you told me not to come around until I'd gotten my life together. Their shame was written all over their faces. Emma couldn't bring herself to look at me, and Jake's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. I'm sorry, Emma whispered finally. Ren. I'm so sorry. I know, I said quietly. And I did know. I could see it in her face, she wasn't faking. She finally understood, and she hated what she'd done. Matthew's mother stepped forward, her own face stricken. Marshal Hayes, I owe you the deepest apology. The things I said about you. You spoke based on what you thought was true, I said, sparing her the guilt. No harm done. But the truth was, there had been harm. Not to me, I was stronger now than I'd ever been, but to what could have been. To the trust we might have shared, the years we lost, the bond that had been cracked by their small-minded ideas of what success and failure look like. Will you stay? Emma asked, her voice shaking. For the reception? I don't deserve it, but I want you here. I want everyone to meet my sister, the federal marshal. I studied her for a long moment, the older sister I'd idolized as a kid, the same one who had turned her back on me 3 years ago. I thought about that 12-year-old girl who had lived in Emma's shadow, and about the woman I had become, the woman who had learned to stand on her own strength. "I'll stay for a while," I said at last. The rest of the evening blurred into a stream of handshakes, introductions, and awkward apologies. Matthew's family couldn't have been kinder once the truth was out. His father, a federal judge, spoke with me about cases he'd worked alongside Marshals over his career. His uncle asked about Afghanistan, his tone laced with genuine respect. Emma hardly left my side, showing me off to every guest as my sister, Deputy U.S. Marshal Lauren Carter. There was pride in her voice now, sure, but also a desperate undercurrent, a hunger for forgiveness I wasn't sure I could give. Near the end of the night, as things wound down, Jake found me standing alone. "Ren," he began, voice heavy. "I need to apologize. What I said 3 years ago, the way I treated you, there's no excuse." "Yes," I said simply. "There isn't." He nodded, taking it like a man for once. "Is there any way we can start over?" I studied him. My brother, the golden boy, suddenly stripped of all that polish, standing in front of me with a humility I'd never seen before. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm not who I was 3 years ago. I've seen things, done things, that changed me. I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need anyone's." "I understand," he said softly. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to try." Later that night, driving away from the country club still in full uniform, I thought about everything, the girl I had been and the woman I'd become. The insecure kid who never measured up was gone. In her place was someone who had gone toe-to-toe with traffickers, stared down danger, and saved lives in the shadows. People like to say the best revenge is living well. But I've learned something different. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply becoming the person you were always meant to be, and not caring if anyone else approves.